Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tank. Today, I have Josh Kunkel with me, who owns the Method Group, and we will be talking a little bit about his business, but also about digital first architecture firm and sort of approaches to running a business with minding the topic of digital transformation technology. So, Josh, thank you so much for joining me on this talk
Yes,
today.
thank you.
How are
Yep,
you
I
doing
appreciate
today?
the invite. I'm good. Kind of cold today, but otherwise all right. Yeah,
Yeah. So, Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your business.
sure. So I'm Josh Kunkel. I'm the founder of Method Group, and we are a digital first architecture firm that is based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I have four kids that are 9 and under, all boys. So that is certainly um, always exciting. I guess it's never boring there. And then my wife and I just celebrated our 15th anniversary last week. So yeah, but the firm kind of started with the idea of, if architecture as a profession started today, what would that look like? Just having worked in a variety of, large national, international firm, small, very design intense firm, and kind of medium sized regional engineering and architecture firm. So had the opportunity to get a very broad experience base, especially as it relates to organizational structure and culture, because that's something that I'm personally very interested in, and was interested in kind of breaking all of that open, and kind of exploring, like, why do we do those things? Um, so
Interesting.
our
So,
yeah,
on your website,
go
you
ahead.
describe your business both as like community-oriented architecture services and interior design services. So there's this element of obviously the people that you provide the services for, but then
Mhm.
also like to describe your business as like, digital first. Which one came first? I'm curious to know.
So so in regards to community and like why we kind of organized the way that we did, is I feel like many architects and architecture like forget about the individual. And so, especially with larger projects, you're kind of dealing with the masses. And so you really forget about that our buildings are for people, and those people are individuals, and those people are very different, and they have different needs. And so that's where, with the way that we set up the firm being digital first, is that allowed us the most flexibility. And
Mhm.
so, as like we're hiring right now for an architect, and that position is fully remote capable. Although I did find we're not able to work internationally just yet. Got a lot of international candidates that were actually very exciting. We just don't have the payroll structure to be able to take care of that. Um, but being digital first really allows for a lot of flexibility in work environments. As we've discovered, we started all of this pre-pandemic, and so being digital first was still very at the front end. Being remote capable and actually operating fully remote in many respects was very, very progressive. But we found through the pandemic is that people have really started discovering that there's different ways of working, and it doesn't involve having your butt in a seat from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or longer. That we do a lot of different things in our firm, personality testing. We have one-on-ones every couple of weeks, checking in on how you're doing personally and professionally, and how that relates to your goals and where you want to be as a person inside and outside the firm. Um, So it's really a commitment to empowerment, both inside our walls for our team, but then also for our clients and who our clients' um, ideal, users are. And so, like, we focus on a lot of mixed use, infill, urban projects. And so our people tend to be, people that are walking, people that don't get there by car, or if they have a car, it's the experience of walking there. And what does that look like? So,
So interesting. And I'm curious about like the actual idea of, or like the structures that you implement to be a digital first firm in architecture. So what does that really mean to you, and how is that transforming the way that you deliver projects to your clients?
yeah, so it's actually, we have some clients that we've never met in person before, and we have some buildings that we have never seen, or some sites that we've never seen in person before. So it's really, relying on technology very heavily and being very comfortable working digitally. So we use Slack internally, mainly because it's a lot more fun than Microsoft Teams. We are Zoom, which also integrates with our Slack, and so it's very easy just to hop on a call just like this. And then we've experimented with our consultants working in Slack. Of course, we do Zoom meetings, and then we've trained several clients on how to use Zoom. And we haven't gotten yet with Slack, but I know that we will in the future with clients, just because Slack is a conversational communication tool and email is really a formal record holding tool. Email was never meant to be conversational. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's terrible at it. But then it's also, using tools like Miro, which is an infinite whiteboard program for doing design collaboration. They invested in BIM 360 with Revit, instead of having a server and Dropbox. So everything for my role, everything is accessible from phone, since I don't use Revit. My team does use Revit, and everybody has laptops. Most of our team has iPads. And so it's really about making it as accessible and as usable as possible. Um, and that it's actually a better experience using it digitally versus using the more traditional old school methods.
Wow, this is fascinating. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your organizational culture. You mentioned a little bit about people and how important it is for you to sort of be on top of your team, and also the way they feel in this working environment. You also mentioned the different tools that you coordinate technologically. But I'm curious, from the business perspective, how is that always pan out towards your organizational culture in the business?
So it's really about, knowing that your team are people and they have needs, but those needs in a traditional office, like if you were having a bad time outside of the office, or like if you had kids and, they were up all night screaming or whatever, like your office typically wouldn't care about that. And so we do, and we try to be flexible and balance, there, like we have our studio leader that's about to go out on maternity leave for the second time. And so I know, I understand in Europe, it's a lot more common to have paid maternity leave, but here in the US, there's no requirements for paid parental leave. And so we provide 12 weeks parental leave. And so, but it's also about having those conversations, and just we do daily check-ins. And one of those things is like a stoplight color system, that it's red, yellow, green, and it's just a gut check of how you're doing today. And that way, then we track it and it plugs into KPIs and all of that. But it really gives us an understanding, because then we can start tracking, like, okay, you were green, 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 and then you hit red on the last day. So like, what does that mean? Or like, you've been slowly going from green, and then you've been yellow a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden you're orange or red. Like, okay, that means something else. But then it's again the goal conversation, because we always need to be aiming towards something. It's We're very intentional, and I'm a very intentional person, and so I always tend to be aiming towards something. So we as a company tend to do that also, and help facilitate that process.
I love this. I love it because I think that it's super important to have this kind of system and actually lead with intention. But also, I wonder if sometimes, and perhaps I'm wrong, maybe it's just an impression, but is it not sometimes feel a little bit personal to share your feelings at work?
Yeah,
How do you go about that?
that's a great observation. And
I guess it's a
so
bit of
that's
a
where,
European question because
yeah.
we're less emotionally open, I think, than
Mm.
Americans normally are. But also, I think that there's level of awareness that comes to it that could really benefit a lot of practices.
So it's really, building a foundation of trust for your team. And so, like, whenever stuff goes wrong, like, a lot of times in firms, like, you'll just hold that, and you'll hold it, and you'll hold it, and then you quit, and then you go off somewhere else. And then your exit interviewed, they're like, what went wrong? And it was like, oh, this thing 6 months ago that then just festered and sat. Well, it means that you weren't comfortable bringing that thing up. And so I think it's, again, just being willing to have those open conversations on a daily basis. And we give lots of opportunities for that. We have our one-on-ones where that's just a private conversation. And so most people, feel most comfortable bringing things up there. But in any of it, we have special, we have project meetings. And then we have our leadership meeting called Level 10, to where those things can have the opportunity and the floor to be able to be shared. So one, you have to have the comfort and the trust that's built, which trust is earned. And so it takes some time. But then two, it also centers around accountability. And so we tend to be very transparent on what our expectations are, and related to that. So like, sometimes it's like you are given a task and you wait until the very end, and then it's like, oh, well, I didn't know what to do. And you're like, well, why did you wait until the last possible second to say something whenever you should have said something before? And then so again, that's based on that comfort of asking, hey, I don't understand what this means, or I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So yeah, but it's a lot of it is just conversation, like communicate, communicate, communicate.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's a great model for leadership, certainly, and also makes a more aware team of people, where people are actually open to understand their feelings as they come to work. But also, I'm sure that it helps a lot with conflict resolution. I wanted to ask you about that specifically.
Mhm.
Do you have any specific ways in which, since you can identify certain issues earlier because of all the systems that you've put in place,
Mhm.
have you also discover or develop interesting conflict resolution strategies for your team?
So very interesting question. So I guess I haven't really thought about it in that way before, but I think a lot of the things, like if you think about a fire, and it starts with a spark, and then it grows and grows and grows. I guess you could think about cancer in the same way, that it's one cell and then it multiplies and then multiplies. Issues are the same exact way. And
Mm-hmm.
so by allowing that issue to be addressed whenever it's very small, and then you cut it off, and then it's no longer an issue. So one that requires you to act on it, which a lot of firms are aware of issues, but they don't do anything with them. And so then it just naturally sits and sits and sits. But then two, again, it's back to that trust and being comfortable bringing that issue up, or knowing your team well enough that you can notice whenever something's wrong, and then you can go dig in on a individual basis and be like, hey, something doesn't look right here. Like, are you doing okay? Like, what's going on here? Like, let's talk about it. But it's yeah, it's frequency in how you deal with it. So, but then it's also, anyone on the team is allowed to like call something out and say, hey, this isn't going like right, or hey, could we do that better, or could we do that differently? So, and then all criticisms are held privately. So criticize in private and praise in public. So because that criticism in public can really erode a team's confidence or an individual's confidence. So in
Yeah, it's
work
quite
in
toxic.
offices, yeah, where like, if you screwed up, like if this line weight was the wrong thing, then you were, cussed out and had a stapler thrown at you. So like
Yeah.
that doesn't do any good. So yeah, ruling by fear doesn't, it works for some people, but not for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is fascinating. I wanted to sort of take the conversation back to your
Mhm.
services and clients. It's quite now also actually knowing a little bit more about your team. You can see that from your website, even that you're very people oriented. You speak about that in your communication, also share photos of your team members. This is great, but I'm curious about sort of the community building side of things and developing relationships
Mhm.
with communities. I've seen that you refer a lot to the sort of problems that you can solve as well with the business and communicate around that quite clearly. And so I'm interested to see a little bit how you've come to the clarity as to exactly what your firm should do and what is exactly the mission
Mhm.
behind your business in order to serve your clients in the best possible way.
Yeah. So that's something that's always been it kind of core since the beginning, but it's taken us a while to really like land into it and hone it down and refine it. Um, and so we initially started with this idea of find your place, um, and like really wanted to name the firm after dwell or something like along those lines, because dwelling in a place, really has kind of an ethos to it, that it's really centered around belonging. But one, dwell is pretty well taken, and then find your place kind of sounded like we were a real estate office trying to help you buy a house or something. And so we kind of um, we backed onto off of it. And so it's really about designing and building, designing and revitalizing communities through design is what we've really landed into. And so for us, that really means focusing on infill and adaptive reuse projects, which for us, those tend to be very urban, and again, focused around walkability, which for us, although it's a lot more common in Europe, our cities developed after the car was invented, and so many of our cities revolve around the car.
Mhm.
So it's actually a different approach. But again, so our office is in a Main Street district, so in a walkable urban district, and I'm on the board for our Main Street association and all of that. But it's a community is about fitting in, but adding something to it. And so that's how we approach our projects, and why we kind of really focus on community is you're always dealing with context. And so what's to the left, what's to the right? Do you add, do you take away? What is that in relationship? Because again, with many forms of architecture, it's about this shiny object. And that shiny object is not always necessary in a community and can actually negatively impact a community because it draws so much of its attention to itself, and then you forget about everything else. And in many respects, that can be very detrimental. It's very ego-centered, and we tend to be very low ego.
Yeah, and I think it shows through your website. I'm curious, and you mentioned that a little bit, those sort of methods that you use, but what sort of strategies did you decide to pursue in respect of positioning yourself in front of your community as an architecture practice and actually communicating all these values to the people interested?
So there's been two books that have been pretty influential for us. The first one is Traction by Gino Wickman, which is kind of an entrepreneurial operating system for how we run our business, which helps create a lot of clarity and vision and values and all of that. And then the second one is Story Brand, which is a marketing focused book that talks about the client's journey and how you as the service provider fit in and how they're the hero of the story. So we haven't done those. We've modified them for what we need and how we use them. But another one that has been pretty influential is the Business of Expertise, which is a really fantastic book. At least for me, I had the team read it, and not everybody got as much out of it as I did. But that one, again, about positioning and thinking about expertise, that's really where those niching conversations and really started like honing in on, we're only going to do this slice of it, and we're going to do it really well. It's also where the idea of horizontal and vertical markets, I'd always heard of verticals, but I'd never heard of horizontal markets before, and realized that was why we were having so much trouble identifying clients, is because we were only focusing on horizontal markets. We wanted to focus on working with really great people. We didn't really care where they were, but that means that we're still kind of having a very wide spectrum. So that's whenever we decided to provide the vertical markets of infill and adaptive reuse. And since we've done that, and since we've started implementing that, things have really started working well for us on kind of the lead generation end and the attraction end.
Amazing. That's, I mean,
it's kind of like magic.
Sounds like music to my ears, because I fell in love with marketing, and I think that specifically the books you mentioned, but also some of the topics that you talk about are really powerful and like have an ability to transform a business in architecture, because something that happens to a lot of architects is that we fall under this idea of being a commodity, because we sell ourselves as another architect that can provide draft plans and sections, elevations, design. But I think that it's really important to sort of position yourself in the market as an expert and be paid for that expertise. Therefore, people understand that your price is not just attached to your time, but also the years that it took to arrive to where you are as an expert, education, practice, different project expertise, experience, and things like that. And so therefore, it really helps, but also communicating that and that sort of niche topic. So just because you're so marketing savvy, I'll ask a very detailed question because I'm curious how you answer it, and also just curious what we can learn from this. But once you understood the power of niching and obviously implemented that strategy to communication, we speak about lead generation. What methods did you use to attract those customers, specifically if it comes to digital marketing?
So that's really where we discovered kind of because we had a lot of data to look over, we realized that, Instagram and Facebook, like we'd never really gotten any leads off of that. LinkedIn was actually really great. And so started putting a lot more time in this quarter, have been working a lot more specifically of putting in a lot of time there. But then it's also organizational involvement. Um, so for me, that means that like I'm less involved with like the AIA because our clients aren't there, but they are in ULI, so Urban Land Institute. So
Mm,
starting to ramp up time involved there. But then we've also started looking at, we haven't done it yet, but what does advertising look for us? And so we've realized that we're so focused on like specific individuals that we want to work with that traditional advertising has not been as, it hasn't been effective just because, a lot of advertising is kind of the thinking about like a shotgun approach,
mhm.
that you're hitting a broader market, hoping that those couple of individuals will come to you, but that's not very effective.
Yeah.
And because we're very specific on services that, like locally, advertising doesn't really make any sense at all. And so
Mhm.
it's working with like specific publications like Multifamily Executive or Urban Lands Institute or whatever, to where we have a much higher potentiality.
Mm. Super interesting. And in that respect, for example, do you invest in publishing about your work, or is it more like expert articles, for example, where you speak about potential projects that you would like to attract, like speak in expert terms about those sort of
Mhm.
projects, or what strategies did you implement in order to position yourself in an adequate manner in front of that community?
So we've talked about both. We're 3.5, coming on 4 years old as a firm. And because architecture is a long kind of
Yeah.
industry, that we've only had a couple of projects that have actually been finished. And so that's where, so like, one of them won a whole bunch of awards, and so that our clients were thrilled, and so we've kind of gotten that out there. It was a pediatric clinic, and so that one is kind of turning into other projects for us. But then on the expertise side, we've been focusing on blog posts, at least for now, just practicing writing. But um, it's an area that we have a little bit more work to do,
Mm-hmm.
just as we dig in, and get more comfortable kind of writing down that expertise. I found for me, doing podcasts, I'm a talker, and so these are really great kind of things
Mm-hmm.
for us. So eventually, we've talked about a podcast since we started. And as you know, like podcasts are a lot of work and they're not easy to put together. So it's one that we just haven't been able to carve the time to do.
Mm-hmm. And again, like I think in this respect as well, understanding who your audience is with a podcast, if you're an architecture brand, is very important to give the
Mhm.
content that actually your potential clients wants to listen to, not other architects, right?
Exactly.
In this
Yeah.
case,
Yeah.
because I think with publications altogether, a big mistake that architects do is they want to get published in Design magazine or Arc Daily, but most of these type of publications are read by other
You
architects.
are exactly right. And so that's where most architects think about how they can, almost market to other architects. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's not the point. So
Mm-hmm.
that's for your self promotion. And you can then say, oh, yes, we've been featured in Architect Magazine. But that's really like, if you're thinking about passing the eye test or whatever, like that's just a check. You're there. okay, let's focus on you and how involved you are in the industry and whether or not you have the experience and the location and all of those things. Um, so yeah, we found that too. Like, so we've kind of swayed a little bit away from that, and that's why, like multifamily executive or ULI are really more of interest versus like Architect Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So
And that makes
for that
sense. Yeah,
exact
that makes
reason.
sense. And I think just kind of to wrap up, but still really interested in, you seem to understand what sort of clients you want to serve. Therefore, what sort of information do you choose to share with them as positioning yourself as an expert? And what would be the vision for a podcast? Just curious to know which direction you would go as an architecture brand to attract those clients through that sort of medium.
Um, Again, great question. We haven't really found the answer. I think it's, there's a lot of it is kind of digging into different facets. Like maybe because there's a difference between whether or not it's just us kind of talking about a topic versus like an interview format to where maybe we would interview another real estate developer that's doing something interesting or a historic tax credit consultant and talk about historic tax credits. But I think it's around, very specific issues that are hot and relevant to our individual clients right now. But as far as our clients, they tend to be centered like in the middle of Gen X is really our center. And we found that them having a lot of comfort with technology really helps. And they also tend to have kids um, or, a pet or something else, and they tend to travel. And also, they tend to be very community centered or community oriented. It's not like, again, we work with a lot of developers. And so the developers that are 100% their highest priority is making money and everything else could go away, those tend to not be a good fit for us. Yes, making money is important. That's how we stay in business, but it's really about the right values and how you think about who your ideal clients are. In their case, who their tenants would be, who their residents would be, or who their patients would be. So that like money tends to be second on their list.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas, being community oriented or digging into, sustainability or whatever, that tends to be the first thing.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. I am actually going to share a question here by someone from, it's
Mhm.
Francisco from YouTube. He says, not sure if this was answered, but do you need to be a licensed architect to start a digital architecture firm?
So here in the United States, yes, you need to be licensed in order to start an architecture firm. You could start a design firm without being licensed, but every state is different on what constitutes architecture and what constitutes being licensed, being required for.
Yeah, and I think that the same goes for Europe.
Mhm.
I'm sure that there is a possibility to deliver projects as a business owner in architecture if you hire architects that can sign the plans and comply with the regulations. But yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you so much for joining me on this great interview. Share your website with us and perhaps the social media if you would like for anyone to reach out or follow you, because I think your work is inspirational and also the content you put out there. And for any architect that is listening in, it's nice, it's interesting to follow this sort of brands and business owners because the clarity behind marketing can be a good lead for you as well, to work and figure out your ways in which you communicate with your audience. But going, for example, on Method Group's website, you can very clearly see that those values of marketing, niching out, also speaking about the values community, it's all there. So that communication is really crucial, because a potential client that goes on the website can see exactly if these services are for them or not. And so I really recommend checking out the website and checking out Josh's profile. Josh, where do people go to find you?
So you can go to method.group is our website. We're on Facebook, Instagram. I think we're method group underscore or method group underscore okay, or method group okay underscore, something like that. And then me personally, Josh Kunkel, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, very active in both places, trying to get more active on on LinkedIn. And then my email is josh@method.group. So yeah, so I'm usually pretty accessible.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Josh. Thank you for everyone who's listened in and asked questions and wrote comments. Really appreciate that. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to sort of make an announcement that I launched the Disrupt Symposium this year. You can just, well, this week, literally, and you can check it out on www.disruptsymposium.com. My cat is going crazy. And you can subscribe to a mailing list there, or just purchase tickets directly. We have a 50% early bird ticket sale going till the end of this month. And after that, the prices go to full price. So it's worth it to grab your ticket now. And also, if you subscribe to a mailing list, there is several mini events that are happening on ArchDaily's Facebook page and other social media, where we're interviewing some of the keynote speakers and talking to different topics related to business development or marketing and things like that. So I really invite you guys to go and subscribe. So therefore, you'll be informed about all these mini events, and they're free, but packed with value, and you can learn a lot from them too. So putting it out there. I hope I'll see you all on the inside, especially at the event as well. And thank you so much. Thanks, Josh, again.
Thank you. This is fun.
I'll see you all soon. Bye.